Do you feel wealthier than you did 5 years ago? Close your eyes and genuinely reflect. Does the relentless pressure of rising costs and stagnant opportunity weigh heavier than ever before? For the vast majority of people, the answer is unsettling. We are constantly told that the economy is stronger than ever, that the system is stable, that our financial leaders, specifically the Federal Reserve, have everything under control. Yet, you see the price of groceries, you see the cost of a mortgage, you see the erosion of your savings, and you know, deep down, that the promises do not match your reality. This pervasive disconnect, this feeling that the game is rigged, that your hard work buys less and less, is the deliberate result of the Federal Reserve making the single largest, most arrogant bet in modern history. The Fed is not just betting against market fluctuations, it is betting against 5 centuries of irrefutable historical cycles, a pattern of boom, debt, collapse, and reset that has destroyed every single empire that tried to defy it. And if the Fed loses this bet, you and your family will inevitably pay the price. To truly grasp the scale of the Federal Reserve's defiance today, we must first understand the ancient, insidious financial playbook they have adopted. The oldest trick in history is simple. When a ruler or a state needs more money than it has, it doesn't raise taxes openly. It devalues the currency. It is a silent tax, a hidden confiscation that the state knows is too subtle for the masses to fight until it is too late. Ancient Rome mastered this tactic. For centuries, the silver denarius was the trusted backbone of the empire. But when emperors faced rising military costs and needed to pay their legions, they gradually reduced the silver content, replacing it with cheaper base metal. A coin that was once nearly pure silver became, by the 3rd century, a copper disc with a thin wash of silver. The masses saw the price of wheat skyrocket, their life savings, their denarii evaporated. The Roman Empire didn't just fall because of external barbarians, it fell because its currency collapsed from within. This pattern repeats across every century, a relentless historical curse on any power that abuses its control over money. The modern world didn't escape this curse. It merely institutionalized it through the creation of the central banking system. The very model for the Federal Reserve began in the English-speaking world. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded not out of philanthropic stability, but because the British Crown desperately needed money to fight its wars with France. Wealthy financiers lent money to the government by buying bonds, and in return, the government guaranteed those interest payments, funded by taxes on the common people. The national debt became a permanent institution, the elegant foundation of a system where a privileged financial elite financed the state's power and became indispensable to its global ambitions. This set the precedent. Debt, once a temporary necessity, became the primary product of the most successful economic system in history. The creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913 took this European model and perfected it for the American century. Before 1913, the U.S. financial system was constrained by gold reserves. The Fed was framed as a lender of last resort to stabilize the system, but its ultimate true purpose was to give the U.S. government the unrestricted power of the purse, the ability to finance its massive global ambitions without being fully beholden to the constraints of gold or conservative lenders. This was the first great American deviation from the hard lessons of history. It was the first act in the Fed's biggest gamble, the bet that American exceptionalism, backed by the strength of the dollar and its industrial power, could succeed where every other empire, Roman, Spanish, French, British, had eventually failed when faced with the temptation to print, borrow, and defer the reckoning. For decades, the global financial system was anchored by the Bretton Woods Agreement after World War II, which declared that the US dollar was convertible to gold at a fixed rate of 35 per ounce. This made the dollar as good as gold and solidified its global dominance. But it also placed an absolute, tangible constraint on the Federal Reserve. It couldn't print money recklessly because if it did, foreign governments could, and did, demand gold in return, draining the American reserves. By the late 1960s, the financial pressure of the Vietnam War and ballooning social programs meant the U.S. was spending far more than it took in. Foreign nations, realizing the U.S. had printed far more dollars than it could ever back, began demanding gold. The gold reserves were bleeding out. The ultimate moment of defiance came on August 15, 1971. When President Richard Nixon announced the temporary suspension of the dollar's convertibility to gold. That temporary suspension became permanent. This was the moment the Federal Reserve went all in on its bet against history. The dollar was officially untethered from any physical, tangible asset. It became a pure fiat currency, money backed by nothing more than the faith and credit of the U.S. government. This move was the ultimate freedom for the state, granting the Fed the power to print trillions with a keystroke. This was the official declaration, the rules that governed money for 5 centuries, that destroyed every previous power that dared to defy them, no longer applied to the United States. They believed the sheer scale of the American economy and its military might made them immune. They were betting that this time is different. To ensure the world still needed the now fiat dollar, the U.S. executed a brilliant, ruthless maneuver, the petrodollar system. It struck a secret deal with Saudi Arabia, mandating that all global oil transactions would be priced and transacted only in U.S. dollars. Suddenly, every nation needed dollars to buy the world's most vital commodity, creating artificial, relentless global demand for U.S. currency and, crucially, for U.S. debt. This brilliant shield gave the Fed the confidence to pursue its high-stakes gamble, allowing debt to explode over the following decades. Governments, freed from the constraints of gold, saw their deficits skyrocket. Households were encouraged to borrow with 30-year mortgages as casually as buying groceries. The debt-fueled empire was born, built on the promise that the printing press could solve every problem. The ultimate test of the Fed's gamble arrived with the 2008 financial crisis. The system, powered by excess credit, imploded. The historical playbook would have dictated a painful, necessary, deflationary cleansing. Banks that made reckless bets should have failed, and debt should have been wiped out. Instead, the Federal Reserve intervened with a move unprecedented in its scale, quantitative easing, QE. It injected trillions of dollars into the financial system, effectively printing money to prop up the banks and the bond market. This action nationalized the risk and socialized the mistakes, ensuring that the financial elite survived while the debt mountain grew larger and more toxic. QE was a desperate act of defiance against the financial cycle, an attempt to use the printing press to perpetually delay the inevitable reckoning that history demands. The gamble was existential. Could they print away a crisis of this magnitude without triggering the ancient curse of inflation that destroyed Rome? The final, maximalist bet unfolded after the 2020 pandemic. When the global economy shut down, the Fed, emboldened by its success with QE after 2008, unleashed the largest monetary expansion in human history. They printed trillions more, financing government deficits that dwarfed wartime spending, lowering interest rates to zero and sending checks directly to citizens. This was the moment the Fed pushed the button on the very thing history warns against. You cannot use volume to replace value. And the curse finally answered. What followed was the sharpest, most sustained bout of inflation in a generation. The silent tax, the debasement of the currency, had finally arrived, a direct, tangible theft of wealth from the average household. Every single day, your wages stretched less, and the future you had planned for suddenly became exponentially more expensive. The Federal Reserve, realizing it had gone too far, was forced into a frantic emergency pivot, the fastest and steepest rate hike cycle in 4 decades. This pivot is the Fed's ultimate desperate maneuver. They are now attempting to engineer a soft landing, a mystical economic creature that has almost never been achieved in financial history. They are trying to tighten the money supply just enough to kill the inflation they themselves caused, but not so much that they crash the entire global economy that is now fundamentally addicted to cheap debt. They are betting that their advanced models and sophisticated economists can perfectly defy the simple, brutal truth that has governed finance for 5 centuries. Excessive debt always leads to a reckoning. This final gamble presents only 2 devastating outcomes, both confirming the failure of the 5-century bet. Outcome A. The Fed blinks. The recession or financial panic becomes too painful, and the Fed is forced to stop raising rates, or worse, start printing money again. This proves the system is officially broken, leading to a decade of high, persistent inflation, crushing the middle class and destroying the purchasing power of the dollar. Outcome B. The Fed holds firm. They continue to tighten until the debt-addicted global system snaps. This triggers a massive, systemic collapse, a deflationary debt spiral that wipes out trillions of nominal value, causing mass unemployment and corporate failure. In either scenario, the Federal Reserve's bet against history is destined to fail. Every previous power that tried to finance endless ambition with endless credit met the same fate. They created a magnificent illusion of wealth, but when the music stopped, the true value of their money evaporated. The lesson of history is not one of panic, but one of perspective. You cannot rely on institutions that are structurally designed to save themselves, not you. The real survivors of every financial collapse, from the fall of Rome to the hyperinflation of the 1920s, were not those who trusted the promises. They were the ones who doubted first. They shifted their wealth to assets that governments cannot falsify and central banks cannot print. Real wealth. This means looking beyond the paper promises and the numbers on a screen. It means holding tangible, productive assets. It means cultivating skills and knowledge that hold value regardless of the price of the dollar. It means recognizing that the system is not stable just because the authorities say so. Financial education is not a luxury, it is resistance. You are living inside the greatest financial experiment in human history, and the only choice left is whether you face the inevitable reckoning blind or awake. If you understand the ancient cyclical traps, you can avoid becoming their victim and hold on to something real when the Fed's biggest gamble finally pays out its catastrophic consequence.